Fort Benning, Georgia. November 14, 1941. A Thursday morning, just past 6 in the morning. The air over the training grounds carries the smell of damp earth, gun oil, and diesel exhaust from the supply trucks rolling in from the eastern gate. The sun has barely cleared the tree line, and the Georgia sky burns a pale, cold orange on the horizon. Inside the main pistol range, the lights are already on. The generators hum. Targets made of painted canvas hang at measured intervals, swaying slightly in the wind that cuts through the open end of the covered range. It is the kind of morning that makes young men feel invincible. Second Lieutenant Harold James Croft is 24 years old. He graduated from West Point 8 months ago and has been stationed at Fort Benning since the summer. He is tall, broad-shouldered, academically decorated, and completely convinced of his own exceptional ability. His record at the academy was outstanding. His marksmanship scores were among the highest of his graduating class. He has been told this so many times, by instructors and superiors and fellow cadets, that he has stopped treating it as a compliment and started treating it as a simple fact of nature, like the color of his eyes or the width of his hands. He is simply good with a pistol. Better than most men who have ever lived, or so he privately believes. On this particular morning, Croft arrives at the range earlier than his assigned training group. He has a habit of arriving early, partly for practice, partly for the quiet satisfaction of being the first man ready. He sets his bag down, checks his M1911 with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done it thousands of times, and begins his warm-up routine at the far end of the range. He is halfway through his second magazine when he notices the other man. Standing at the far lane, shooting alone, is a figure Croft does not immediately recognize. The man is older, perhaps mid-50s, and his posture at the line is unusual. Not the regulation stance Croft was trained to assume. Not the square-shouldered, arm-extended position the Army's marksmanship manual prescribes. The man stands slightly turned, almost casual, his feet planted like someone who has been standing at a range since before Croft was born. His uniform bears no visible rank insignia from this distance. His collar is turned up against the morning chill. He is simply a man with a pistol, shooting quietly in his own lane. Croft watches him fire 6 rounds. He cannot see the targets clearly from where he stands, but the cadence of the shots is precise, controlled, no wasted movement between pulls. Croft dismisses the man quickly, probably a veteran instructor running private drills. Old habits, old technique, nothing remarkable. He returns to his own practice, but then, one of Croft's fellow lieutenants, a young man named Davis who arrived 10 minutes later, wanders over to the target board at the far end of the range to check the older man's groupings. Davis walks back wearing an expression that Croft reads immediately because Davis is not particularly skilled at concealing his thoughts. "What?" Croft asks. Davis shakes his head slowly. "His grouping is about the size of my thumbnail. 6 shots. Same hole, more or less." Croft looks at the older man again, who has not moved, who is now reloading with the unhurried movements of someone for whom this is simply breathing. Croft feels something stir in his chest. Not admiration, something more complicated than admiration. He hands his pistol to Davis and walks toward the other end of the range. The older man does not acknowledge Croft as he approaches. He finishes reloading, raises his weapon, and fires 3 more rounds in the space of perhaps 2 seconds. The reports echo through the covered range. Croft watches the target. He cannot tell where the rounds land from this angle, but the rhythm is extraordinary. It is not speed for its own sake. It is the rhythm of a man who is not thinking about shooting. A man for whom shooting has become something below thought, something closer to breathing. Croft stops a few feet away. He introduces himself with the ease of someone accustomed to this kind of casual competition among officers. "Lieutenant Croft, sir, just transferred to the Thursday morning detail. Your technique is unconventional." The older man lowers his weapon. He turns and looks at Croft for the first time. His face is weathered, deeply lined, with pale eyes that carry an expression difficult to classify immediately. It is not warmth. It is not coldness. It is the expression of a man who is permanently, fundamentally, completely present, who sees everything, processes everything, and wastes none of it on unnecessary display. "Unconventional," the man repeats. Not a question, not an argument, just the word, held up briefly, examined, then set aside. "With respect," Croft says, and among young officers at this time, among the kind of men shaped by West Point and the culture of earned confidence, what follows next is not unusual. It is, in fact, almost expected. A kind of ritual assertion of self. I've finished top of my marksmanship program. I'd be glad to run a comparison drill if you're willing. Standard range, M1911, 6 rounds at 25 yards, timed. Best grouping wins. He smiles when he says it. The smile of a man who has made this kind of challenge before and won every single time. The older man regards him steadily. The pale eyes do not widen, do not narrow, do not project surprise or amusement or indignation. They simply look at Croft the way a surveyor looks at a stretch of terrain, measuring without judgment. 6 rounds, the older man says. Yes, sir. 25 yards. Yes, sir. A pause. The generators hum. Somewhere outside the range, a truck engine turns over and catches. The older man slides a fresh magazine into his M1911 with a single motion and racks the slide without looking at his hands. All right, Lieutenant, he says. They take their positions at adjacent lanes. A sergeant from the range detail walks out to the target board. He is a compact man with a mustache gone gray at the edges, and when he sees the older man's face clearly for the first time this morning, something happens to his posture. A very slight change, a stiffening, not fear exactly, something adjacent to it, something more like the involuntary attention a man gives to a sudden shift in the weather. He does not say anything. He simply walks to the board and turns to watch. Croft rolls his shoulders. He settles into his stance. He breathes out slowly, the way he was trained. His front sight aligns with the rear sight. The target is a dark oval at the end of the lane. He focuses on the front sight, which is regulation, which is correct. He fires his 6 rounds in measured time. Careful, deliberate. The shooting of a man who knows he is being watched and knows he is good and wants to be certain the evidence confirms what he believes about himself. He lowers his weapon and looks at his target with satisfaction. The grouping is tight. A cluster near the center mass that any instructor would approve of without hesitation. He turns to the older man's lane. The older man has not moved from his position since Croft began firing. He is still standing at the line, his weapon still raised, and then he fires. Not 6 rounds. He fires 6 rounds in what seems like a single extended moment. Not rapid fire in the Hollywood sense, not the frantic pull and pull and pull of a man trying to go fast. Rather, it is the sound of controlled intention arriving 6 times in sequence so fast that the last report seems to step on the echo of the first. It sounds less like shooting and more like a sentence spoken in a language Croft does not know. The older man lowers his weapon. He does not look at Croft. He faces forward, toward his target, in silence. The range sergeant walks forward to collect both targets. He carries them back under his arm and lays them side by side on the scoring table at the edge of the range. Both men walk over. Croft looks at his target first. He reconfirms what he already knew. It is excellent work. Any marksmanship instructor in the American Army would look at that grouping and feel genuine satisfaction. Then he looks at the older man's target. The 6 holes are not a cluster. They are not even 6 holes in the conventional sense. They are, more accurately, 1 hole, slightly elongated, with the ragged edges that come from multiple rounds passing through the same opening in sequence. 6 rounds, fired faster than Croft has ever seen a man fire in competition, have passed through a space no larger than a $quarter coin at 25 yards. Croft stares at the target for a long moment. He is a precise and honest young man in ways that matter, and he has been raised in an environment that demands honesty about outcomes, so he does not construct an immediate rationalization. He simply looks at what is in front of him and understands it for what it is. He has been shown something outside the range of what he believed was possible. The older man picks up his weapon case from the bench behind the firing line and begins packing methodically, each item placed with the same precisely controlled movement that defined his shooting. How? Croft begins. He stops. He reforms the question. I've never seen that. The grouping. I don't understand how the timing is possible without sacrificing accuracy. The older man snaps his weapon case shut. He looks at Croft and there is something different in the pale eyes now. Not pride, something that functions almost like patience, though it carries no softness in it. The patience of a man who has had to explain important things to unprepared people many times and has decided long ago that the explaining is still worth doing. Speed without decision is just noise, the older man says. Every shot I fired I had already decided before I lifted the weapon. The target is known. The angle is known. The trigger weight is known. If the decision is already complete, the execution is just motion. You are still deciding while you shoot. That is what you are hearing in the time between your rounds. You thinking. Croft says nothing because there is nothing immediately to say. This is accurate. He knows it is accurate the instant he hears it. The older man picks up his case. He turns to leave. And it is at this moment that the range sergeant, who has been standing near the scoring table in his very particular posture of military stillness, catches Croft's eye and says, very quietly, the two words that rearrange everything Croft has just experienced. General Patton. Croft turns. He sees the older man from a different angle now, in the way that context reassembles a face you have been looking at and shows you what you were initially missing. The ramrod spine. The pearl-handled revolvers visible now at the man's hip where his coat has shifted. The way the range sergeant holds himself in the presence of this man. The way the air in the room has had a particular charge to it since the moment they began shooting. And Croft only now understands why. General George Smith Patton, Jr., commander of the 1st Armored Corps, the most decorated tanker in the American military. A man who carried sabers in the 1912 Olympics, who designed his own cavalry saber while still a young officer, who fought in Pancho Villa's expedition and in the First World War, who studied the battles of the ancient world the way a physician studies anatomy, with the intention of applying the knowledge in practice. A man whose reputation in the American military is spoken about the way soldiers speak about the weather, as something powerful, permanent, and not fully within the scope of human control. He is 56 years old. He is not a random soldier. Patton pauses at the edge of the range and looks back at Croft one final time. His expression has not changed. It carries no satisfaction at being identified, no amusement at the situation, no version of the smile that a lesser man might offer in this moment as a kind of mercy. It is simply the face of General George Patton, which has looked at countless young men across countless ranges and fields, and has made a private assessment of each one in the time it takes most men to figure out which end of the conversation to begin. The men who beat me, Patton says, and his voice carries without effort the voice of someone who has commanded in open fields against artillery noise, are the men I want near me. The men who don't yet know they can't beat me are the interesting ones. He picks up the folded target sheet from the scoring table. He tucks it under his arm. Which one are you, Lieutenant Croft? He does not wait for an answer. He walks out of the range into the pale morning light, his footsteps precise on the concrete floor, his posture unchanging, the pearl handles at his sides catching just a moment of the early sun before he turns the corner and disappears. Croft stands in the range for a long moment. The sergeant beside him says nothing. Davis, who was standing near the back wall and heard everything, says nothing. The generators hum the way they always hum, indifferent to what has just occurred. In the days that follow, Croft does not speak extensively about what happened at the range on that Thursday morning. Not because he is embarrassed, though there is certainly an element of that, but because he finds that the incident is difficult to translate accurately into words that do justice to what the experience actually taught him. He can describe what he saw. He can describe the target. He can describe the speed of those 6 rounds fired in sequence. He can even describe Patton's explanation of decision preceding motion. But the core of it, the thing that actually changed in him on that morning, resists description. What changed was not his confidence, exactly. He remained, in objective terms, a gifted marksman. His scores after that morning continued to be exceptional by any standard measure. What changed was the ceiling. For 8 months following his graduation from West Point, Harold Croft had operated with an invisible ceiling above him that he had not recognized as a ceiling because he had never encountered it. He had simply moved through his days with the assumption that the top of his talent was close to the top of what talent could be. That the distance between himself and the very best was measurable, closable, perhaps already mostly closed. The target with the single elongated hole removed that ceiling entirely, not by going through it, by revealing that it was not a ceiling at all but a floor, and that above it were levels of mastery so removed from where he currently stood that the gap could not be estimated from where he was looking. Patton's explanation of decision preceding motion stayed with him for the rest of his military career. He thought about it while training. He thought about it under fire in North Africa 2 years later, and in Sicily, and in the grinding winter advance through Europe. The idea that execution is only motion, that the real work is done beforehand in the cold, clear space of preparation and decision. That a man who is still making choices during the moment of action is always behind a man whose choices were already made. Among the officers who served under Patton through the campaigns of the Second World War, Croft became known for something that his superiors noted in after-action reports, but struggled to name precisely: a kind of economy. A quality of being ready before the situation required readiness, of moving through difficult moments without the lag that seized other men who were processing and deciding while the moment was already in motion. He never spoke about the range at Fort Benning, not to his subordinates, not to the journalists who occasionally asked veterans about their formative experiences. It was a private thing, the way important things often become private, not from shame, but from the recognition that the experience belongs to a category that language handles poorly. George Patton led American forces across North Africa and through Sicily and up through France and into the heart of Germany. He died in December of 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident outside Mannheim, 12 days after it happened, never having returned to active command. He was 60 years old. He died without a final battle and without the combat death that some who knew him believed he had always privately wanted. He left behind an army he had remade in his own vision of what soldiers could be. He left behind campaigns that military historians would study for decades as examples of mobile warfare so aggressive and precisely timed that they seemed, to those living through them on the German side, to violate the laws of what armies were supposed to be able to do. He left behind stories, hundreds of them, because Patton never went anywhere without generating the kind of friction that becomes stories. And somewhere among those stories, in the collection of things that happened during quiet mornings at training ranges before the war began, there is the story of a young lieutenant who thought he had found a random soldier to challenge at the pistol line, who fired excellent rounds and saw them answered by something operating in a different category of excellence entirely, who heard 2 words from a range sergeant and understood in an instant that the ceiling he had never seen was not a ceiling at all. The lesson was never posted in a training manual. It was never formalized into any doctrine, but generations of officers trained under men who had trained under men who had trained under George Patton carried some version of it forward without always being able to name its origin. Decide before, move after. The shot that hesitates has already missed. And if you ever step onto a range and feel that particular quality of readiness in the man standing beside you, the readiness that seems to be made of something denser and older than ordinary confidence, consider first who you are standing next to. Because some men have spent so much of their lives preparing for the moment of execution that by the time the moment arrives, they have already been there so many times in their minds that the real thing is simply confirmation. George Patton was 56 years old that morning in Georgia. He had been preparing for moments of execution since before Harold Croft was born. And on a quiet Thursday at the Fort Benning pistol range, before the war that would define the century had even officially begun, he fired 6 rounds through a single hole and walked out into the November morning as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. Because for him, it hadn't. It was simply what preparation looks like when it has had long enough.